Well, you may hear the wind blowing. Here we are next to a ghost cum, a very Australian scene, and I think this week we'll look at class and COVID-19 in Australia in the 21st century. Now, we have a lot of things in Australia that we tend to have amnesia about. Not just the invasion of this country and the inability to strike a deal with this nation's First Peoples, but also the concept that Australia is a classless society. And for generations, this is the type of ideas that have gone out in the community. Now, obviously Australia isn't a classless society, but we can't use the old Marxist analysis of class in Australia in the 21st century, because obviously it doesn't work. What COVID-19 has done is actually delineated class lines in terms of the four major divisions that we have in this country. And these divisions are broken up in terms of income, because income in a capitalist society, disposable income is the key. Disposable income in a capitalist society allows you to access options. The more disposable income you have, the more options you have. And if you have enough disposable income, you can have the option of actually not physically working, but just investing your assets. Now, obviously class in different types of society has got a local tinge. For example, in a dictatorship, class revolves around the dominant party and the leader of that dominant party in that particular society. And class in a theocracy or a religious-based sovereign nation state, obviously class resides, power resides in those religious authorities who interpret that particular document which regulates activity, religious activity in that country. And now in Australia, although religious denominations do have a lot of power, you can't really describe them as a specific class. And although Parliament has some power, you can't describe it in the same way as you would describe a single party state in a dictatorship. So what we have to do is we have to look at class in a different way in this country. And the way I approach it, and I assume other people approach it in the same way, it's a matter of, if you live in a capitalist society, disposable income determines what options you are able to pursue. The more disposable income you have, the greater the options you can pursue. In Australia, despite only 25 million people living on a resource-rich continent, we have over 700,000 children living in poverty. Let's not forget that 1 in 3 Australians relies on social security benefits to survive. That's disability support pension, old age pensions, supporting parents' benefits, child assistance packages, and the list goes on and on. So 1/3 of Australians, that's 1 in 3, is totally dependent on government social security support. Now, I see people who depend on social security support having minimal, if no disposable income, once the basic necessities of life have been met. And obviously this 30 to 33% of Australians on social security support are the ones who are at the bottom of the heap as far as disposable income is concerned, and as far as the options they are able to pursue. And what COVID-19 did is it forced the government to initially double the support which people were receiving, because the government understood very clearly that if it didn't double the support, there would be a lot of dissension amongst people who would not be able to actually access their basic needs during this period, not that they could before. So people on social security benefits are one class who has no disposable income, and that is one of the biggest classes in Australian society. Then we have about 50 to 55% of people who you can describe as working class. What that means is they need to work in order to survive. Because of the high price of housing due to speculation and the opening up of the market to private investors, because of government fees and charges which continue to increase despite very low inflation, despite loans that people take out, the issue is, how do people meet their basic needs? How do they pay back those loans, those mortgages, or pay their rent? And how much disposable income is left at the end of the month or the end of the week? And you will find that the majority of Australians who are working have no disposable income at the end of the week. They have a small buffer, and that buffer has been, how small that buffer has been highlighted by two facts. One, during the COVID-19 crisis, average wages have increased by 5%. And they've only increased by 5% because it's a statistical anomaly. What it means is that the greatest impact on jobs during the COVID-19 crisis has been on accommodation workers, entertainment workers, workers involved in providing basic services, workers involved in the restaurant industry, workers involved in food delivery, and these are the workers involved in shopping centres. And these workers have a particularly low wage. Most are casual, many are part-time, wages are low. And the government was forced to introduce the JobKeeper allowance, which is paid not directly to the worker but the business involved. The JobKeeper allowance, because it was quite obvious that even without income for 1 or 2 weeks, there would be major dislocation in society. So most people who are working from week to week are not in a position to save. Once superannuation is paid, once rent is paid, once a mortgage is paid, once outstanding loans are paid, and let's not forget that banks and financial institutions are still charging up to 21% for some credit card loans. That's 21% when they can borrow money at around 1%. That's an extraordinary profit margin. Once the school expenses are paid, living expenses are paid, government charges are paid, registration is paid, public transport or a private transport is paid at the end of the week. Most people work in order to survive. They have a minimal buffer. That buffer is usually incorporated in superannuation. You can't access superannuation except in times of emergency until you retire, and even then it's doled out to you. I mean, superannuation is nothing more than the privatisation of old age, where the state washes its hands of its responsibility to citizens who have worked for 30, 40 or 50 years at the end of their working life. So this particular group, so you've got people on social security benefits, then you've got the majority of people in the workforce. The next group is a group which has done exceptionally well. And these are people who would have been traditionally defined as working class or middle class, who have disposable income at the end of the week. Traditionally, disposable income has been put in the bank. But because of low interest rates, because of major changes to government policy and government legislation over the last 40 years, especially over the last 25 years, which has given people with disposable income free handouts, what we have seen is the growth of an investment class, and currently the investment class makes up about 8% of the Australian population. These are people who have enough disposable income at the end of the day. It could be a tradesperson, it could be a senior bureaucrat, it could be somebody in the teaching world, it could be a doctor or a vet, but at the end of the day they have disposable income, which is not invested in banks anymore, in savings accounts because of minimal interest rate, but which is now invested in homes through negative gearing. This is the only country in the world that I know where you get a tax advantage for owning a second home, and negative gearing has allowed the investment class, that 8% of Australians who've got enough disposable income at the end of the week, to invest heavily in housing, which is rented out. They leverage that housing to the maximum so they can claim any losses, any paper losses they make, as a tax deduction. The other thing that Australians with disposable income have been encouraged to do through tax incentives is buy stocks and shares. It's extraordinary to think that if you have enough disposable income to own stocks and shares, and I'm talking about outside your superannuation contributions, that you can actually achieve a tax advantage by the government giving you money, which is called franking credits for owning stocks and shares. So the philosophy over the last 20 to 30 years is to pass legislation which pushes people into investing disposable income back into the capitalist system. Well, so if you're part of the investment class, you're doing exceptionally well. Now the next group that we're all familiar with is the 1%ers. That 1% that owns the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication. Now this is an exceptionally powerful group in our society. It's powerful because it dominates the parliamentary agenda. And it dominates the parliamentary agenda because in a society based on private investment but for private profit, people who've concentrated wealth in their hands have the ability to influence parliamentary legislation. They have an extreme ability to influence parliamentary legislation, because if there's no investment, there's no jobs. And the pressure that they're able to apply to parliamentarians is the pressure of an investment strike. Like workers remove their labour during a period of collective bargaining, investors can remove their money. And interestingly, for the first time since 1970, Australian companies are investing more profits overseas than they're investing in Australia, which is a real concern. So it's no wonder that we have a situation where Australian mining resources belong to a few large transnational corporations. It's no wonder the legislative agenda is in such a sad state that we have 700,000 children living in poverty in this country. As I said before, they not only own the means of production, distribution, exchange, but also the means of communication. Not just the means of communication between you and me and social media, but importantly, the means of communication regarding print media. I know many of you who are watching this YouTube will scoff at the idea that the legacy media, especially print media, has any influence in society today. Well, I beg to differ. Now, Mr. Murdoch, an astute businessman who's a great believer in private investment for private profit, has been subsidising the Australia's only national newspaper for the last 50 years. And he's done that for one very good reason. Because it's newspapers which set the daily agenda. What appears on social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and the list goes on, is to a significant degree determined by what appears in the print media that day. The conversation on radio and television, pay television, once again is dependent on what appears in the print media that morning. They tend to dominate the discussion and push the discussion in a particular way. So the 1% that own the means of production, distribution, exchange and communication, although a very small group, own a great deal of wealth, over 40% of the wealth in this country, while the 30% of Australians on social security benefits own less than 1% of the wealth in this country. They have an extraordinary influence in Parliament. So in summary, COVID-19 has highlighted the class divisions in our society. Not class divisions based on old-fashioned notions of working class and ruling class, but class divisions in a capitalist society, a society based on private investment for private profit, based on disposable income. If you're one in the 3 Australians are on a social security benefits, you have no disposable income at the end of the week. That means you have no options. If you're a working person, irrespective of your trade or profession, if at the end of the week you have no disposable income, again you have minimal options. Obviously you have more options than people on social security benefits because you have more income, and obviously the changes are relevant not just in terms of trade. Because you're a tradesperson doesn't mean you're working class. Because you're a professional doesn't mean you're ruling class. It's the amount of disposable income at the end of the day. Then we have the investment class, the class that has done exceptionally well, over about 8% of the population. I mean, social security beneficiaries around 30%, people involved in the working class between 55 and 60%, investment class around 8%. They've done exceptionally well by using their disposable income to invest in areas where government legislation has allowed them to have a direct access to the Treasury through negative gearing. That's gifts from the government for people for owning stocks and shares, owning more than one homes, and franking dividends, gifts by the government to people who own stocks and shares. Then we have that 1% that continue to determine the parliamentary agenda and have such a profound impact on this society. So when we think about class in Australia during the COVID-19 era, think about the 4 classes. Think about the amount of disposable income each class has. Think about the changes that need to be made in order to make significant changes to the way we live. Because what COVID-19 has done, what the doubling of Job Seeker has done, what the introduction of JobKeeper has done, is highlighted how fragile the economic fortunes of most Australians are. Irrespective of how much you earn, what is important is disposable income and whether you can use this country's investment-friendly laws to use that disposable income to maximise returns to you. This is not the type of society I've struggled for over 50 years. I'm sure this is not the type of society you want. What we want is a different society, and if you want a different society, I suggest you join public interest before corporate interest. Look at our website, pipsy.net, download the application form, join us today. Hopefully within the next 6 to 12 months we'll be able to register a federal political party and have an impact on the debate in this country, looking at things realistically, not in a 19th century way, not in a 20th century way, but in a 21st century way.